All right. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be speaking with journalist Ford Fischer about his latest battle with YouTube censorship. Ford is an independent videographer who runs News to Share. His video content has been featured on all the major news networks, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, and their YouTube channels. But YouTube has removed some of his videos from his own YouTube page and demonetized his entire channel. They say they did this because it is, quote, content that focuses on controversial issues and that is harmful to viewers. So, Ford, what's your response to this?
Controversial issues. I mean, I feel like this is kind of the point of what YouTube is, right? So, I mean, I want to, before saying bad things about the YouTube company, right, I'm going to have criticisms. I do want to say that, like, I fundamentally love YouTube. I love what YouTube is about. I think it represents the democratization of, you know, giving people voices, whether it be to argue about which Batman film is best, or share recipes, or whatever. You know, share independent news in my particular case. You know, so I think YouTube is valuable, and I don't want to make it seem like I am sort of a hater of their company or something like that, because I think they've created something beautiful, but I think they also really have gone off track, particularly in the last few years. So what happened in my particular case here is that, you know, I cover political demonstrations, I cover activism, and I do so in as raw a format as I can. It is as devoid of commentary as possible. The way that I'm talking to you right now, I actually tend not to do on my own channel at all. You see very little of me if you were to browse through my channel. You know, and then when I talk on other people's networks, like, you're not going to hear me say like, oh, those people are good or bad or something like that. I just try to describe what happens, and when it comes to my own videos, I just show what happens with video without commentary. So with that being said, I filmed the events of January 6th at the Capitol, including the sort of violence and so forth that took place when people stormed into the Capitol. But before that, I filmed at then President Trump's speech, where he was basically laying out the case for why people, in his view, should be protesting the certification of the presidential election. The speech was 70 minutes long, and it started pretty late. So people who were there were somewhat agitated, but also, you know, hyper excited to see him. And so, as you can see, and I see that you're playing the video, you know, I was at you can kind of see, like, if you were to look past all of those trees and so forth, kind of in the background, like, that's where President Trump actually is in relation to where I was. So Trump is speaking in a secured area at the Ellipse just south of the White House, but most of the people who are watching from the National Mall. So I was filming kind of from in the middle of them. And what I wanted to show is the way that the crowd sort of reacted to Trump's speech, because I think that this was, you know, I could feel it in the moment that it happened, that this would be one of his most historic speeches. For 4 years, people had this kind of anxiety. What if he loses? Will he leave? Will he say that he didn't really lose? What's going to happen? That used to be a hypothetical. And I think that that speech really kind of answered the question, how is the Trump era going to end? And of course, the you know, insurgency that took place directly after it, I think will be a defining moment for President Trump. But as we enter the era of this second impeachment, which is sort of an unprecedented move, there's basically two questions that would have to be answered in order to find Trump guilty. Was it an insurrection, and did he incite it? And so, was it an insurrection? At least in my, like, just opinion looking at the dictionary, like, I think that, you know, people stormed into a government building in order to stop a process of government. I think it's I would find it hard to debate that it was an insurrection. But in terms of whether Trump incited it, I don't want to make any kind of a legal conclusion, but I think that it's pretty obvious that a 70-minute video showing the speech in which he allegedly incited them and showing the people that he allegedly incited would be really paramount to answering that question. Like, it's literally, this is the equivalent to if we had a recording of the Ukraine phone call, right? Or the deposition of Bill Clinton during his impeachment.
Yeah,
these are
put in like super simple terms, like, yeah, I mean, or like just as a security camera at a bank robbery. I mean, it's like,
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to compare it to bank robbery,
yeah,
but
because again, yeah. Sorry, my bad framing, because bank robbery we know is criminal. But go.
Right.
So go ahead.
Right. But so to just put it into like perspective, the Democrats' memorandum that describes their reasoning for the impeachment cites exact moments that I filmed in my video. And granted, it doesn't link to my video. It's not, but and it's unclear to me necessarily whether they specifically were looking at my video as they transcribed and wrote the memo. But the memo describes things that my video shows, such as President Trump compared American elections to third world countries, in his own words. And when he did so, the audience chanted, "Fight for Trump, fight for Trump." And so there are probably legal scholars, there are probably smarter people than me that could make a determination as to whether that shows incitement in a legal sense. But I think that the relationship between what President Trump said and the way that his audience received it, I don't think that you could make a conclusion like that without footage like mine. And my footage was completely uncut. It's not like I was cutting across highlights or just showing Trump's most out there statements or something like that. This was a nonstop shot. Technically, I changed the battery in my camera once, but I used my iPhone to take a clip during the dead time so that there would be no moment of actual dead time in the video. It's essentially one continuous take. And YouTube took it down because they view that video as propagating the sort of false theory that the election was swayed due to mass fraud. And so I had basically been advocating for myself for the last week and a half about, hey, YouTube, you messed up. Hey, YouTube, fix it. And, reaching out to journalists and so forth and bringing attention to this issue. At first, YouTube didn't respond at all. And then finally, as of 2 nights ago, YouTube replied by saying that the problem was that my video didn't include a counter-arching view. That my video basically, if you're going to film something that includes the then president of the United States, say that the election was stolen, you have to include something that says that it wasn't. And my obvious retort to this would be, like, I kind of sort of get that principle if it was someone sitting there and talking into a webcam claiming that the election was stolen. Not calling for censorship against that person, but like that would sort of be what that policy would seemingly apply to. But my video doesn't make any claims about the election. My video it doesn't really make any claims at all. It just shows literally what did the president say and how did his audience react. I'm not endorsing the words of the president.
Yeah, it's just raw American history.
Right. I mean, and it's so by contrast, it's not hard to find full Hitler speeches on YouTube, right? Like, I would contend that it's pretty obvious that historians posting that kind of footage are doing so for reference and research and so forth. And so if YouTube said, for example, we would appreciate if you included in the description some other resource that someone could look at, or if they told me, this is the kind of disclaimer that you should include on content like this for it to be allowed. Like, that's the kind of dialogue that I was kind of trying to reach out to them on, because honestly, I don't want to fight with them. I don't want to break their system or whatever, right? I'd like to accommodate them within the bounds of not compromising the journalism, but still matching whatever they view their community standards to be applied as. But no, so after they said, well, if you've seen other footage of the president at this speech, it probably had appropriate context, I replied by showing links to 4 mainstream news outlets that had his exact same speech, just a video, like not even roving around the camera, not even talking about the insurgency, just literally calling it Trump speaks at Save America rally. And indeed, some of those were monetized, right? I watched on Rupley where YouTube marks it as, it said, this is a Russian government funded news outlet, and you can watch Trump's same speech on that, and it gave me an ad for Liberty Insurance first. So YouTube is profiting off of the same content that it's unacceptable when I post it, but it's okay when the Russian government posts it. or
a
Russian
mainstream media or corporate mainstream media sources. And I've experienced the same thing, Ford. Actually, it was just one small part of a video I made about Bernie Sanders. He's worked to end our support of the Yemen war, the war in Yemen. And my video got demonetized. The share button is removed, and it was age restricted.
Right. Yeah.
Because of that controversial. I'm forgetting the term they use. They're constantly changing in their definitions and standards. But the bottom line is, I used footage. It's graphic imagery of the war in Yemen that was used on MSNBC and CNN. I used the same goddamn footage, and my video got suppressed. Now, in your case, this is taken to an even more absurd level because yours was completely removed, and yours, like you.
The whole chat. So the whole channel got demonetized.
And the whole channel was demonetized.
Right. So
go ahead.
I just to establish the timeline of it. Like, I posted the video right basically after it happened. It was the night of January 6th. It was not until like a week and a half later, when or 2 weeks later, that the House delivered the impeachment articles to the Senate, and the night before that occurred was when they took down my video that basically describes the exact reason why they did that, or not describes, but illustrates, shows you the exact reason why they did that. And then it was 2 days later that they responded, and then yesterday they demonetized my entire channel rather than continuing to sort of dialogue with me.
Well, Ford, I'm going to disagree with you a little, because it includes part of the reason why they filed, articles for impeachment, but it also includes some evidence that may go against it. Now, I'm not saying that's why they took it down, but clearly it's disturbing when you're taking down raw footage that shows that someone could interpret fairly, and with their own eyes, and see how the crowd reacted to some of these lines that allegedly incited violence. And I looked at it, and a lot of the crowd is pretty damn calm. They might cheer like, yeah, but then they're just like calm and just like wander around the crowd as normal. They didn't just like all of a sudden take out some pitchforks and guns and then storm the Capitol, and that's really an image that I think people get when it's reported in the news, when they're just shown a couple clips.
Right. I mean, so I think that my angle is fairly unique in that it shows the way that the crowd is talking. So, I mean, the chanting in response to his words is fairly universal. But of course, I mean, I think a thing that sort of must be noted is that probably no more than about 1,000 people, which is, I mean, a huge amount, participated like at the Capitol, like at the actual storming of the Capitol and on Capitol grounds. But tens of thousands of people were in Washington, D.C., right? So as you just sort of see me panning across the crowd, you're seeing a lot of flags, a lot of different symbols. I think there's a lot to be learned from footage like this. And indeed, a professor at Harvard, actually, a director of a nonviolent action lab, sent a letter to YouTube saying the same about the value of this kind of footage. But let
me add to that. Sorry to cut you off, but he didn't just talk about the value of this kind of footage. This Harvard professor, who you could tell me more about exactly what he does at Harvard, but he specifically called out your channel, named your channel as being beneficial for documenting history and for his own research.
Right. And so the thing I was going to say is that the plurality of the people who you would see in the video are not necessarily participants in the exact in the event, right? So there's so many of them might have marched toward the Capitol, but tens of thousands of people were essentially outside the Capitol spectating as the insurgency went on. So I mean, I do think that it shows the scale of the entire day. And to your point about evidence on the other side, Trump's own lawyers had to release basically a counter memo, and they've made the argument that when he said those things, that it did not create a cause and effect relationship with what happened at the Capitol. And so I'm not going to say that one of the sides of that argument is right, but I think it's extremely obvious that video showing people, absorbing Trump's words into their eyeballs before the thing took place would be, paramount to understanding whether that question is, yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me, I have a little clip. I'll play it. This is one of the lines that was used as evidence for Trump inciting a riot is mainly the line, like, "We got to fight like hell" or something.
Yes.
So I'll play that. You recorded
Sure.
that. And again, this is just a clip of very long raw footage, but let's take a look at this.
Make sure you include a counter view, or else YouTube's going to take this down.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I'm not arguing one way or the other, but I will argue though that it's not so cut and dry. I don't think it's so cut and dry. And so here we go.
Something's wrong here. Something's really wrong. Can't have happened. And we fight. We fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
That's right.
Our exciting adventures and boldest endeavors have not yet begun. My fellow Americans, for our children, and for our beloved country. And I say this, despite all that's happened, the best is yet to come.
So you see this guy just casually strolling off. I mean, so that's video that started. The first or second line was, "We got to fight like hell." There was kind of a mild cheers, and then he goes on. He says, "The best is yet to come," and then then there's a legitimate cheer, and then it just kind of dies down. I don't think that's incredibly strong evidence of starting a riot. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think that if somebody was offering a countering view, so I'm saying this just
go
to
ahead, yeah, please
you
do.
from
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Taken down. Now, so that was basically toward the end of the speech. Trump's "the best is yet to come" line is something that he has said at a lot of his speeches, which is why you heard some people knew that that's what he was going to say and actually like yelled it out loud.
It's a tagline or a slogan.
So right after that was the end of the speech where Trump actually said, "So we're going to march to the Capitol and I'll be there with you." Right. And I think that I don't know whether Trump saying that he was going to be there with them inspired the events at the Capitol. And again, I don't think anyone could know that. And, legal scholars are probably going to debate that exact question. But people actually basically believed that that was going to happen. So to those who don't know, Trump actually went straight to the White House and did not actually do what he said he was going to do, right then. But as when the speech ended, I immediately started heading toward the Capitol. To people not familiar with DC, the White House is about 1.5 miles down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol, but it's a pretty straight shot. You can see the Capitol from the, essentially where you would exit that area of the National Mall. And as people were marching along, there was a particular group that I was following that was led by Ali Alexander, the leader basically of the Stop the Steal movement, and Alex Jones, who YouTube may not have any idea who he is because he's gone. Just kidding. But Jones and Alexander were marching along with a group of people behind them saying, "We're going to go to the Capitol." Alex Jones was careful to say, "We're going to be nonviolent." But something that was a really fascinating moment for me that I think history will basically forget about. It probably doesn't matter that much. But 2 black SUVs actually drove by and happened to go sort of, I think, into the Trump Hotel or something. And the crowd thought that was Trump. Briefly, they were like, there he is, and they were running ahead. And then it occurred to them when there wasn't a full motorcade that it actually was not President Trump's sort of security detail. But Trump had previously been driven through one of the first the first Million MAGA March, right? This was the third of 3 gigantic events in DC, one in November, one in December, and then the infamous one in January. Trump did drive with the crowd, through the crowd, in November, and then he did a helicopter flyover on the second one. On the third one, he didn't go with them, but he said he was going to, and they had all the reason in the world to believe him.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. That's interesting. I wonder now, so you saw Alex Jones, was he in your video at all?
So I ultimately edited my work into 3 videos for YouTube. So Twitter, I have it very play-by-play, like dozens and dozens of individual clips showing individual things. But for YouTube, I basically broke it up into 3 videos. One was a 22-minute compilation of the entire insurgency. And thankfully, that video is still up, and that's what I have spent the most time, licensing. People want the footage of the violence. So CNN has aired that, NBC, CBS, BBC. I could name like a million of them.
The actual violence is
the violence.
cool. I mean,
yeah, the violence.
So that's not controversial or harmful. I mean,
by the way,
I would never advocate
yeah.
for censoring that stuff. I just find
Right.
it funny that just the people listening to a speech of Trump in the distance, that's the controversial, harmful thing. Like it's
right. And the policy is definitely applied inconsistently, because Status Quo, which is the name of a progressive outlet that does work somewhat similar to mine, but with a specific political bent. But I'm quite friendly with them. They similarly filmed a lot of the shots of violence that have been cited on a lot of those other places. Several documentaries that have already come out cite mine and their footage like right next to each other, in fact. But they had a similar reel of the violence that took place at the Capitol, and their reel of the violence was taken down. So I think the remedy to this is stop taking down news video. But I think that the fact that my insurrection video is up while my speech video is down, and then someone else's insurrection video is down, I think what it shows is that YouTube is completely inconsistently applying whatever nonsense standard they have to their approach to this entire situation. And clearly they are basically exempting the mainstream media from whatever standards they've imposed.
Yeah. And it just is nuts, because if they're worried about context, raw video, hours long, unedited, that provides more context than any mainstream news source.
Right. I actually like to think of my content as the context, right? So that if a news outlet were to use my footage and then just post 10 seconds of it that is disadvantageous to any specific person, I can say, here's the whole thing. It doesn't mean that I'm defending that person, but here's what actually happened in its entirety. This tangentially, I will say I wasn't able to live stream that day because there were so many people kind of bunched together, but I generally live stream the entirety of situations I'm at, precisely for the reason of providing context for everything that I shoot. What's fascinating is YouTube is taking the position that if you film a politician as prominent as the president of the United States speak, that speech in and of itself is not context, that there's some wider context. You have to make sure you get on CNN's opinion, or tell your audience, make sure you watch CNN to get the real story, or
that's
whatever.
The thing. It's like context to them in this context is not actual context. Their definition is some mainstream source that adds their own narrative, which isn't actual.
Which isn't what context is.
Exactly. It's like creating a new context. It's not the original context. They're recreating context.
Right.
Or contextualizing it, recontextualizing it.
My kind of conclusion is that given the inconsistency of how they apply this against mainstream media, which is to say they don't, versus how they apply this to independent media, I think that when they say context, it's a cop-out, and what they really mean is you don't have a CNN logo at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, it's messed up. Let's see. Oh, another example. Well, let's just continue on that thread.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not your first rodeo with the YouTube
Not
censorship. And just to introduce that, I'll introduce an experience I had.
Sure.
Again, and then you explain your similar experience. So I featured. Okay, this is gonna should transition well. So I did a video about how to defeat racism. That's the title of the video. And in it, I introduce how it was very popular at the time, still is, that the best way to interact with somebody who's a Nazi or is racist is to just punch them in the face, period. So I just thought I'd offer a different perspective, and I included clips from Dia Han's video. What was the name of it? Because I know you had footage in it. Do you remember?
White right meeting the enemy?
Yes, meeting the enemy. And I also had clips of Daryl Davis, who was featured on CNN. His story was featured on CNN. His story is he is a black man who befriended KKK members and over time took a while, but over time, he was able to convince them to leave the Ku Klux Klan.
And he still does that work, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm quite friendly with him. Yeah, he has, I believe, 50 Klan robes that he's gotten people to that he's convinced people to give him after realizing essentially that they were wrong by talking to him over time. But he is extremely friendly even toward people who he doesn't have this approach of like forcing them into swaying. Like he creates sincere friendships with people. With the real purpose of trying to find the goodness in them so they can find the goodness in themselves. And so, yeah, I would just emphasize, I would highlight that that's somebody definitely to look into.
Yeah, and yet
YouTube seem effective.
Yeah, I agree. And so that obviously I agree because I promoted him in a video, but YouTube determined that video too controversial. The idea that, you know, maybe don't punch people you disagree with in the face automatically. It's just, hey, maybe it is controversial to some people, but they demonetized it and age restricted it. So, and then, but in your case, they actually removed controversial content along.
Yeah, I've had that age restriction happen on several occasions. So in 2017, I filmed a lot of situations, including Charlottesville, related to like the alt-right. And so much of that content was age restricted, although I can't think of an example of, well, actually there were two videos that were outright deleted back then in 2019, and then they restored one of them. But since the alt-right kind of fell apart, most of my coverage has really been more of now it's like the Antifa movement, but it's also kind of like, you know, Trump supporters who are not ostensibly racist, like they're not outwardly alt-right, whatever. And so I think YouTube has had a harder time figuring out like what's the standard. It's pretty like it's easier for them to label hate speech when it's sort of very ostensibly hateful. President Trump in his speech saying the election is stolen, that's kind of a new standard. It's a new area for them to get into and say this is a subject that we can't you know, allow to be talked about or shown in our content on YouTube.
They started that with COVID, I think. They were moving
COVID
COVID's
videos. Another one.
That's the first time. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the first time where they actually removed stuff because, you know, it wasn't up to their standard of accuracy, like for you know, being fake news, right? Obvious. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add that it seems to have been very algorithmic on the COVID rollout. So a lot of my footage has been of like people protesting against COVID restrictions, for example, where of course my footage is not you know, propagating any claim about COVID itself. It's just showing this is the way that people are protesting against COVID restrictions. Basically, all of those have been demonetized, and many of them had automatic labels under them that were describing like essentially COVID is real. Here's the information the WHO wants you to know. You know, which I honestly don't mind that as much as outright deplatforming or you know, demonetizing the entire channel. So I didn't really speak out as much or complain about that as much. But the thing that concerns me about it was that it was done mostly in an automated way. It's not like they were sifting through and penalizing disinformation with humans. It was robots doing it.
Yeah, but humans. So yeah, typically algorithms sift through stuff. They'll recognize stuff and automatically, you know, label it or hide it. But ultimately, you can appeal it, and then humans make that decision. And in, you know, my case, the decision was still to demonetize, age restrict, and in your case, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but they still decided to delete some of this stuff. And it's important to say. So you mentioned your whole channel is demonetized now. Demonetization is not just demonetization. I mean, that's a huge big deal. You should be able to make a living off your valuable work. It's valuable according to Harvard researchers and anybody with a freaking brain. So I hope you get you get some of that, you know, that Harvard money. I hope that guy also supports you. You know, I mean, it's great that he wrote something in your support. Anyway, so yeah, everyone support Ford. We'll make sure to give all those websites before he leaves. But where was I going? Oh yes. So demonetization. I don't know if you know this, Ford, but it was determined that it actually when a video was demonetized, it actually was promoted differently by the YouTube algorithm. So even though YouTube, they said the demonetization of your video will have no effect on how it's promoted by the algorithm, but they lied.
Yeah, that's definitely not true.
They lied. A 2017 study. There's extensive evidence. I'll put it in the chat at some point. Showed extensive evidence of demonetized videos getting promoted way less, so they're not recommended as often. And I mean, that's huge, and I can't believe I can believe it, but I read YouTube's notification after demonetizing your whole channel, and at the very bottom it says this will not affect how your video is promoted. But we know that was false in 2017. There's extensive evidence to show that was false, and so I think it's fair to assume that may very well be the case now as well.
I made the exact same point actually last night. I spoke on the phone with a written word article, not with Fox News like on their thing, but a journalist from Fox is writing a story about this, and I tried to explain that same exact thing, which is that it has basically been proven, even if they'll deny it to the ends of the earth, that there is algorithmic discrimination against demonetized videos and, of course, channels. The other thing I would say about this is that in 2019, there was a demonetization purge of about 1,000 channels, and mine ended up being one of them. And it took 7 months of me advocating for them to admit their mistake and just restore it. Of course, they didn't really apologize. I wasn't recompensated in any way for the 7 months lost. It literally just said, like, basically, we reviewed your channel and we have decided to restore monetization, like, and that's it. But anecdotally, I can say, and, you know, it's like different videos could have different popularity. Like, it's very hard to measure this scientifically, but I continued doing the exact same work that I had been doing. I didn't decrease output really because of it during that time. And my view count very clearly had gone down, and more than just going down, as opposed to like before, I assume that this is similar for your own channel. If you look at the analytics, there's usually spikes, like certain popular things cause it to go up. You post a video that happened to be popular, maybe one or two of those per month, and then otherwise there's kind of a consistent stream. Like, it's hard to scientifically show, oh, I would have had spikes in these like places, but it seemed like there really was almost a limit on the amount of viewership that it would get once that was designated. And what I thought was really interesting was that around that same time in 2019, YouTube was describing how they're fighting disinformation by decreasing engagement to non-authoritative sources and instead referring it to authoritative sources. And they were flaunting the fact that, in their view, non-authoritative sources were having their viewership cut by about 70%. Directly following my demonetization, year over year, like the year preceding it, so July to July of 2018 into 2019 versus July to July of 2019 to 2020, it was basically like a dead 70% decrease. Like, it was almost exactly what they were describing. And so even if they're not even if they're saying, oh, demonetization doesn't technically do it, it seems to be directly correlated with some kind of YouTube internal variable that says something like, this is a bad channel, or this is a non-authoritative channel, or basically give people CNN and MSNBC instead of this channel. And that seems to be effective to the tune of a loss of 70% of your audience.
Yeah, that's awful. Same thing on Facebook. I think Facebook actually did mention that if you are flagged, or a video of yours is flagged as false or even partly false, which you could honestly say, I mean, you could say almost anything is partly false, because unfortunately, most mainstream media
if you and I disagree on something, then one of us must be wrong.
Yeah, also because the fact is, it is a fact that time is limited, and you can't, I mean, you can't fit everything in. I think everyone, especially mainstream media, could do a better job of fitting more stuff in and presenting things in a more fair way. But I mean, it's almost impossible to find. You could always find a hole in something, or one little detail. Oh, you could have added this information So
I mean, as a really simple example, in your comments, I see John Bushka wrote that, you know, the CDC and the WHO had some things wrong on COVID in the first couple of months, right? I would say that it's good to be up to date with current information, but if I was going to repost a interview with Dr. Fauci from the first month of the COVID pandemic, of course, it's perfectly fine for people to change their opinions as they know more. That's what doctors should do, especially the head doctor of the country.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should just blacklist old content when it was wrong, right? Imagine if somebody at the time, right? I'm sure that there's CNN video of Dr. Fauci describing something that we now know is not the same way, and he's updated his view, and nothing's wrong with that. But YouTube wouldn't go back and penalize CNN for having spread disinformation because they didn't know something at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Another perfect example of an awful double standard. And yeah, that does exist. Dr. Fauci was on 60 Minutes saying how masks are actually a bad idea, that people shouldn't be wearing masks. He said that on 60 Minutes.
Right. I suspect that if you posted that today, if you reposted that on your own channel today, it would probably be taken down. And I think it would be wrong to use that video as evidence, by the way, to propagate a theory about COVID. I wear a mask when I go to things, sure. Right? So to be clear, this isn't like, you know, I don't know, like people.
No, it's
people
okay. We're
making this point as being disinformation.
Yeah, it's okay. No, we're doing the disclaimer. We're doing the disclaimer. Don't take us down, YouTube. We're not saying COVID is a hoax. We're not saying don't wear masks. We're simply talking about a video by 60 Minutes that you're allowed to be up.
Yeah.
And it should be up because just so people can see. It's okay. It's people should be able to see that. Oh, it was wrong in the past. They got it wrong in the past. That's important.
Right. It's good to know. What did we know then, and what do we know now?
It's
right?
freaking history. It's freaking history. And also, and what does that tell us? Is these authoritative sources are not perfect, and that's what's so goddamn dangerous about YouTube, choosing who's an authoritative voice that can say that is correct, that they will treat as the indefinite or the definite truth, and anybody who opposes it gets their videos removed. That's incredibly dangerous because these authoritative voices can get it wrong, and that's been proven over and over again.
Right. And so I would hope that YouTube would kind of understand that, but I don't think that it seems like they have an extremely narrow view of acceptability that only broadens with the corporate dollars that you bring to the platform.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, well, but this whole idea of saying you can look at this, you can't look at that. We're going to move from this story of censorship online, and we're going to go to a recent video that Ford recorded last week, I believe, on the street at the SEC. You want to set this clip up, Ford?
Sure. So to people who don't know about the game stonk situation, as some people might joke about it, GameStop and AMC both had people buying up stocks in order to basically screw over hedge fund managers who had shorted those stocks, basically making a bet that they would go down. And so this was sort of an interesting populist uprising. Rather than, you know, occupy Wall Street, right, a physical occupying of space, it was using the power of people to sort of, beat Wall Street at their own game. It was sort of an interesting situation led largely by the people at Reddit, but users of Reddit, to be clear, on Wall Street bets. And what was interesting was that Robinhood, which is a trading app that a lot of small-time investors use, shut down trading of those stocks. And it was widely perceived that although the company was trying to make that be about, we're just protecting our users, they essentially were halting something that was helping their users and hurting the hedge funds. And so many people felt that there was a conflict of interest there and that they were serving the rich despite the name Robinhood for their app. And so there was going to be a protest in front of the SEC building in Washington, D.C. And so just to set up the context, in Washington, D.C., people have protests outside federal buildings all the time. There's protests outside the Capitol, the White House, Department of Justice, ICE, right? All these places. But the SEC isn't a normal one to say. I think this is the first time I've ever been to one outside of there. And indeed, only 3 people showed up. It didn't really have a big outcome, but it was a protest that was called for on Reddit, and I thought it'd be interesting to go and see if I can interview anyone who had been participating in this. And I started interviewing the first person who showed up. There was one guy who showed up at the beginning, and I started interviewing him. And as you can show in this video, 2 federal cops came outside to try to say, you can't film in the direction of this building. But so that's probably a good enough setup to show it.
All right, here we go. Let's go to the beginning, and here we go. So this is the one of the protesters, one of the few protesters.
Yeah, so I was interviewing him when we were interrupted, as you're about to show.
Here we go.
Listen, you can videotape, just not right here, in the direction of the building.
In the direction of the building?
Yeah, you point in that direction, you're fine. Just not in the direction of the building.
What statute would explain why I can't film on a public street in a government building?
No, you could film. I'm not telling you not to, just not in the direction of the building. So if you just point in that direction, you're fine. I'm not telling you not to.
To be honest, I was just filming him, but with respect, what statute are you citing that would describe why I can't film in the direction of a federal building?
Well,
we're in public and this is a government building.
Correct. That's why we're protecting the government building. I'm not telling you not to.
But
it's our job to protect this building.
This is my congressional press pass.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Just point in the direction you're fine.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Like, what law are you citing to describe that?
I'm sorry?
You're saying that are you saying that it is illegal to point a camera at this building?
We're not saying it's illegal, but just because we're protecting this building, all right, we just recommend you point in that direction. Right. We don't want to make it no big of an issue than it is. So just out of courtesy, just point in that direction if you don't mind.
Your recommendation is duly noted. I would appreciate law if you were trying to say that it is illegal for me to do so. Right. Otherwise, it seems like it's a recommendation.
Yeah, we're not trying to do anything to the building. But the people inside the building are doing all the rest of us.
Right.
Not you guys. You guys are probably doing your job, but I understand that, man. And I think we're on the same side here.
What does that mean?
Hold the line.
What line?
The market.
Market?
We're getting crushed. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Stock market?
Stock market. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So the SEC is basically enabling a lot of stuff that I'm sure you wouldn't agree with. All right.
For the corrupt. So, but
hey, thank you, guys.
All right, man. You guys have a good rest of your day.
All right. So that you're not allowed to look. You're not allowed to face the building.
Right. And by the way, so I continued to do the interview. I said what I
got
said,
the second clip, but
oh, cool. Yeah, that's all primed up. I said your recommendation is duly noted, and I think he interpreted that to mean I'm going to comply. I just meant, yeah, I heard what you said, but like whatever, right? It's not, there's no law. And I mean, to be clear, for anybody who is not already kind of aware watching this, you absolutely have a right when you're in public to film pretty much wherever you want. The kind of rule, or, there's some states have different laws, but generally speaking, the type of thing that would be illegal would be to film into somewhere where someone doesn't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So you can't stand on a public street and then zoom really tightly into somebody's like bathroom or something, but short of that, I mean, filming into a federal government building, anything like that, with the rare exception of some military installations and things like that, you pretty much always have the right to do it. And those police officers obviously, I think, had some idea of that. I have no idea why they felt the prerogative to make this issue, which obviously attracted more attention onto themselves in the building. But they seemed aware, because when I was saying, can you cite any law? Which law would you be referring to? They're like, oh, no, we just have to protect the building, so we're asking you not to. I have no idea what threat they think that the SEC would be under based on people seeing what it looks like. I
mean, they have photos of the goddamn building on their own website. I mean, it's not a secret building. It's a building that exists in public, funded by public money, viewable from the public.
Right, if you're a taxpayer, you built it. So I continued interviewing the guy. I didn't actually change. I was just like, wow, that was annoying or something. And then I just started doing the interview again, and they came back out and continued to make issues about this. And then another photographer showed up and sort of supported us.
I'll play it. This is just so nuts to
remarkable.
Me. Yeah.
You just can't do it.
Coming back.
Come on.
Round two.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, as noted, again, there's a law. The First Amendment. There's a law that says that people are able to film on a public street, a public building. I'm really not actually like trying to, but now that you've kind of turned this into a First Amendment audit, right? But
actually, I'm not. But I see that you are. But you know, I'm just acting out of courtesy. If you could film in that direction, I mean, how difficult can that be? I'm not against what you're trying to do at all.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not against you guys either. Again, when a law enforcement officer is, and you are law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so in order to, you can certainly recommend something to you, and I'm certainly happy to do it as a courtesy. I mean, I can interview him in this direction, but
yeah,
I mean, he's here protesting this.
Yeah, but easy. I mean, you know, you guys, you know, carry on with whatever you're trying to do. I stand by, you know, if it's the right thing. But just out of courtesy for myself and for my leaders, you know, if you could, just film in that direction. I'm not trying to make things difficult.
I'm happy to keep doing that. I will turn and talk to him just to sort of avoid this conversation continuing.
It's just out of courtesy.
Is there an actual law that you would cite? Are you basically asking just out of sort of the kindness of my heart, point this way because it makes you feel more comfortable, or are you saying there's a law you would enforce? You would arrest or you'd cite me or something like that if for filming a federal building?
That's not what we're saying, man.
We're not saying any of that at all. It's just the protocol. We can't allow the press to film this building. That's it.
You can't.
Protocol.
You're saying you wouldn't allow it. What is the enforceable? Like, is there a law or a regulation? Is there something that you actually?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's orders. I have orders.
Someone told you to tell me that?
I have orders. Yeah, I have orders.
A supervisor at the American Security Programs.
No.
Security Services.
Not at all. Security and Exchange. You just can't do it. I mean, if you like, I could give you a number you can call and you can ask them yourself. Man.
I'd be happy to. I think that would be kind of interesting to see if your supervisor would say the same position.
Right. So, 202. If you want to take this number down, you can ask any questions you want.
Well, I'm recording it, but so I mean, out of curiosity, it seems like you're concerned about video pointed at this building. Like a photographer just showed up with the same credential as I have. Are you saying that you wouldn't want him, for example, to photograph a federal building as well? I don't mean to drag you into it. They're trying to say that we shouldn't film in the direction of a federal building from the sidewalk.
Oh, we have the right from the public sidewalk to do that. We absolutely have the right.
Thank you, stranger.
I'm not doubting that. Okay. What I'm saying is you can film all day in here, but I'm asking you to film in the other direction. That's it. I'm not saying you can't.
We're on public place. We're allowed to photograph. We don't take direction from you about where we photograph. Yeah. But we'll absolutely stay in a public place. We'll not
I'll tell you what,
trespass or anything.
We're going another route. I was hoping that we can come to some kind of understanding.
For sure. Yeah, I have no problem with you personally. I just...
We certainly do, but it seemed like only one of us is respecting the other.
No. It's not disrespectful. It's freedom of
No, it really is. But we'll go another route, okay?
Please.
All right.
Unbelievable.
Coming back.
Unbelievable. It's disrespectful. Ford, it's disrespectful to just face a government building with your camera. It's disrespectful. And then those motherfuckers, they threatened you. Oh, yeah? Well, we're going to have to do it another way.
We're going to go another way then.
Yeah. Another route.
I do think it's really, I mean, the one thing that I regret about that interaction, so actually I think there's two things that I regret about the way that I interacted there. The first one is I probably should have stood my ground more. My reason for saying I'll you know, as a courtesy, when you guys go back inside, I'll just interview him the other way. I think I did actually say that, and I did perform the rest of my interview with him face the other way. And the reason I did that was actually largely because I could see it was really making him uncomfortable. That guy had told me that it was his first demonstration, and you know, when the police initially came out, like, he was very ready to just do whatever they were kind of saying. And, you know, and it was like, we're on the same side, you know, so whatever. I kind of felt that I didn't it would have been inappropriate. I certainly had a right to just keep filming the building, but I wasn't there to film the building, and I didn't want to force this other person into that situation by being like, no, you have to have the thing in the background. Like, I didn't want to force, like, put somebody else at a risk level that they haven't actually asked for. If it had just been me, if I was just going there to take video of the SEC building as B-roll for something, I would have definitely taken that argument farther. But my one other regret is I wish that I had asked them if they had sworn an oath to the Constitution, because pretty much all law enforcement officers do so. Usually there's an oath both to the Constitution and also sometimes to the state constitution that they're in, but those were federal cops that protect specifically federal buildings. Presumably they've only sworn an oath to the Constitution, so they've sworn an oath to uphold the First Amendment. And so it hurts me when I like, it's a funny thing for them to say, but like I actually find it like painful to my heart to hear them say that they found it disrespectful that we are standing up for the right to film a government building. I have nothing against those two particular cops, right? I don't know them. They might be very nice people, but they're not following their oath. And in my view, they're not respecting their own oath to the Constitution by trying to go against a journalist taking video, interviewing somebody, and then ultimately when a photographer showed up.
Yeah, hey, that was absolutely insane. And that's kind of what's happening on YouTube. They said, you're not allowed to look at this. And then you say, hold on. That's not fair. That doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, well, we didn't say you're not allowed. You're just saying you're not allowed. We didn't say you're not allowed. We're just saying you're not allowed to.
Right. And I would add, I see that a commenter, I may be in defense of the cops, maybe not, but they said they did not forbid you. They asked, which they can do. And that was something I was trying to harp on in the conversation. Are you asking me as a courtesy because you just don't want me to, but you're not trying to force it? I'm a little bit more happy to have a conversation like that. Am I making you uncomfortable basically in some way? I don't want to cause discomfort to somebody if there's some reason that I am. So I'm happy to hear someone else out if they're saying that there's a, basically as a courtesy, can you step a little further back or whatever? But to that person's point though, they said we can't allow it, right? The words, we can't allow it. We have orders. Yes. And so that was why I was harping on, when you say we can't allow it, what do you mean? Police are supposed to stop things that are illegal, and they're supposed to uphold. It's not just we're not supposed to violate it. They're supposed to actively uphold the Constitution. They're supposed to actively do those things that would defend that right. If some random person and a pro SEC extremist came and tried to smash the camera out of my hands, they should actually arrest that person. And that's what their oath is. And so unfortunately, at least in that moment, they were defying their oath. I think that was disrespectful to the Constitution, not us being disrespectful to them.
Yeah, and even though, eventually they did say multiple times, oh, we're just asking. Mm-hmm. Like you said, no, that's not how it started. They said, we can't allow this. And then at the very end, they very threateningly said, well, we're going to have to do it another way.
We're going it another way. I half expected them to come back outside with a supervisor. I really don't know what happened inside, but my guess is that if they went inside and talked to a supervisor, the supervisor would go, you can't actually do that. I had a situation once in the IRS actually that I think would be kind of illuminating here. The IRS has public meetings inside their building on the 7th floor that you have to go through security, you have to register, and very few people, basically nobody who isn't actually a party to the IRS or legal firms or whatever that are involved, actually show up. And I worked for a nonprofit at one point that specifically was trying to create IRS accountability. And part of the job that I was doing was going and filming IRS hearings that nobody would otherwise actually see. And there was one time that I went and I set up my camera inside. I was authorized. I was completely able to do it. I did everything right. I set up a camera, and 8 minutes into this meeting, basically their security comes running in and is like, you have to take that down. Come out with me. I was detained, basically. I was not put in handcuffs, but they were like, we are going to remove you from the building for filming this meeting. And we were basically arguing. I'm trying to say this is a First Amendment right to film this public meeting. I went through every procedure, right? I did everything I'm supposed to do. You cannot stop me. And I was like, but if you're going to force me out of the building, I'm not going to make you arrest me, right? Like, if you're saying we're making you leave the building, I will comply with your instruction, but I need to know who are you? What's your name? And the guy's like, well, I can't, it's not me who's doing this. I'm like, literally it is you. Right. And he's like, well, my supervisors told me I have to, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, find that supervisor for me. Like, I need the name of the person who you're saying is doing this. And this interaction was going back and forth until a public relations person, can you imagine that? The IRS has PR, came down, like running down and was like, wait, stop. And he's like, of course you can film here. It's just set up. I hope you didn't miss too much. And he like basically called the cops off, and he gave me a business card and he said, next time you come back to the IRS, can you just tell me beforehand and I'll make sure that nobody badgers you. But I think what it shows is, you know, as opposed to, interestingly, the SEC is not a militarized federal agency. By contrast, I've filmed outside the Department of Justice, DHS, ICE, right, Customs and Border Patrol. When there's protests there, they haven't really had issues. What I think kind of happened is that federal agencies like the IRS and like the SEC that don't really deal with much videography happening at those places, their security guards don't really like deal with this. They don't have experience dealing with First Amendment, whether that be political demonstrations or cameras or a combination of both in the case of the SEC. And so they basically seem to freak out. But the more knowledgeable people within their organization are going to tell them there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. And yeah, there's nothing they can do. You have the law on your side in this case.
Absolutely.
Now, and so because you're dealing with public federal authorities. So and now in the case of YouTube, it's a private company. So how, like, what's your thought on that? How do we solve, because you know damn well those security guards, if they could, they would arrest you. They'd, you know, destroy your your video, you know, and that's what YouTube is doing. And but YouTube can legally do that. So what is your thoughts on this? How can we fix this very real problem with YouTube censorship?
Right. So there are a few different like ways that people approach it, and what's challenging is that I haven't found a solution that I think is really perfect. So I'll tell some solutions, but I'll also say what the problems with them are. So there's an effort, I would say, mostly among what I would call like the populist right, to say let's have the government regulate big tech and therefore make free speech be sort of forced. I understand the frustration and sentiment that goes into that idea, but I'm deeply skeptical of the concept that the state could be the solution to censorship, because historically, states are actually the perpetrators of censorship. And we're really entering a new realm with private companies being the cause of that problem. And so I'm not convinced that the government is actually going to solve it, right? Imagine if Martin Luther King Jr. had asked the FBI of the 1960s, can you make sure that the newspapers publish my content? They'd be like, yeah, right. We'll see about that one. Right. So I think that anybody who's honestly thinking about this, it's hard to come to the conclusion that the government would actually assist in the free flow of information, when I think history would just show that that's not the case.
Well, they don't have to assist in the free flow of information. They just have to defend your right. And that,
you're right to do it.
Yeah. And yeah. So that's what I think more people are arguing. They're saying, you know, this should be regulated in a way where you can't just have these private companies make these decisions without any due process, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as many people. It's not transparent at all. You just have a few people who you don't even know the identities of making these decisions.
Right. So I think that the spirit of that should be how these companies are organized. I would love for YouTube to have actual accountability. I think that Minds, which is an alt social media platform, had a really cool concept, which was they had, if they do take down, you know, it's sort of a free speech platform, but if they do take down something, they do have rules, right? If you're going to threaten people, advocate violence, snuff videos, certain other inappropriate types of content, that they would take it down. But if somebody appeals and says, I actually think Minds was wrong, then it goes to a jury of, it has not, out of 12 other users that are randomly selected, the company would have to convince 9 out of 12 of them that their censorship decision was correct. Like, I don't know that that would be really easy to apply on YouTube, and I assume that sort of a gamified system like that could probably be abused in some way when it's put on a giant scale. But I think that's actually a pretty creative solution. So I'm not principally against that idea.
It's already it's a better, yeah. Sure, like juries don't always get things right. However, that's a better system than we have currently.
I think that the reason that I think that's a good idea. I think the reason that it probably doesn't work as something to advocate for is that YouTube is never going to surrender its own power over its content to the users. That's sort of what should principally be what YouTube is about. But I think that just given the nature of YouTube as a business right now, I think that they're not going to be inclined towards doing something like that. I also see people say, what about using alternative social media platforms? I think I actually saw a super chat in your comments asking that question.
Yes, let me ask that question for Sven. He says, what are your thoughts on Rockfin, Panquake, and other decentralized platforms? Now, I don't know if Minds is it's not. I don't believe it's a decentralized platform.
So Minds is decentralized in the sense that I believe the content lives on blockchain.
That's
it's
right.
not it's a centralized like website, I think, in the like that it's hosted the way any other website is. But I think the actual content, like user posts, are theoretically like blockchain. You know, like
and the messages are encrypted.
And it's encrypted messages. Like it's a step. And so I actually have a Minds account, and I reset it to start posting content automatically from my YouTube recently. So like when I post a YouTube video, it's going to automatically cross post to Minds. And if YouTube takes it down, it would not come off of Minds. So it's effectively a backup. I set up something similar on, there's a service called Odyssey, which is run by the technology called Library, LBRY. Library, maybe. I don't know how they pronounce it, but so I have started sort of backing up my content to alternative sites. But I do have one issue just generally with alternative social media. So like technologically, I don't really, I think that the idea of Parler, Minds, and even Gab is not a bad idea. But the issue is that when they are based around being the alternative social media site for the censored, I think they end up having a, probably very specific communities. Like the reason that I would never touch Gab myself is not because the technology is bad, although I've heard that it doesn't really work right now, but that it has a complete echo chamber of it's just completely all far right, you know, trolls, racists, Nazis, like just various, like, you know, of the extreme far right is
not all, obviously not all.
Not all. I mean, I'm sure you could find examples.
A disproportionate, you know, like much more than you would find, well, than you found on Facebook or Twitter ever.
Right.
Now, obviously, the reason for this, these echo chambers, the reason these new sites are effectively echo chambers primarily, and it seems like in the cases I've seen, is because Facebook and Twitter are not allowing people to say certain things, very reasonable things, I think. Like, I think it's so if someone wants to talk about a ridiculous QAnon conspiracy theory, I think you should be allowed to do that. It's basically, to me, it seems like a freaking, it's a religion. It's a goddamn religion. You know, it's that level, right? There's you can't, unfortunately, you can't prove these motherfuckers wrong because it's just they're just beliefs. You can't, and it's the same thing. I mean, you can try.
I think it's pretty abundantly obvious that Mueller was not on Trump's side, which is a core belief of that conspiracy theory. No, but I'm not going to. Yeah. It's not something that I want to bend into because I know the paradox of conspiracy theorists is that they tend to know much more about the thing than the people who know that the thing isn't true, right? So like if you're going to, just as an example, if you're going to argue with a flat earther, right, it's abundantly obvious to everybody that the earth is round. But if you talk to a flat earther, they're going to have all of these points, like these, like, you know, talking points, these, you know, ways of debating it that are going to be, that you're not going to be able to have a counter argument against them that actually convinces them because they've heard every counter argument. Like the people who are in these conspiracy worlds are by far the most well studied on those individual conspiracies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm not going to engage too much on talking about that, but I understand the point you're making about deplatforming versus just
and
debating.
also like what's a better atmosphere and environment to fight these kind of problems, this misinformation, right? What's a better environment? Well, an echo chamber, which is where they're going to go, or a site where everyone's allowed to speak, where you have a large range of ideas, which is originally what Facebook and Twitter were. They were conceived as a new town hall, and I just feel like if these people were on Twitter or Facebook, is there a better chance of talking some sense into them?
Yeah,
I think there's a better chance. It's not easy, but there's a goddamn chance. You put them in an echo chamber, and there's no fucking chance.
It's something I've been careful not to take really a stance on, because there's certainly academic research about the way that, for example, YouTube algorithms drove people in more extremist directions, where nobody at YouTube probably intentionally tried to do that. But the algorithms of all of these sites are basically based on what's going to keep people watching and what's going to keep people clicking.
Sure.
And the computers, without really the humans trying to do this, have basically determined if you give people increasingly extreme and focused content, then you're going to keep them online. And so the result is that basically these websites do have the possibility of basically radicalizing if you feed them that kind of product. The problem is, like you described, if you do kick them off, they end up in these other echo chambers. And so my exact issue with these alternative sites, although, like I said, I'm backing up my videos to two alt versions of YouTube, if you will, but my problem with like relying on those sites is that they're already echo chambers, and I'm covering news in a way that I want to be objective. If it was up to me, my audience would be basically a cross section of American political life. I would want approximately equal liberals and conservatives. Sure. I'd want some socialists in there. I'd want some anarchists in there.
Or just I'd want just everybody, like every
hardcore right? Trump supporters, never Trump Republicans, like whatever. I would just want everybody who's in American life to be able to see the stuff. And so I don't think you can really achieve that with alt social media platforms. I think if you go on those platforms, you're pretty much entirely going to find people who have the common problem of having been banned from the other places, and that's why they're there in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's true.
So it's a mixed bag in terms of how I feel about those.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see. Anything else you want to hit on before we let's see, any other questions in this chat?
Yeah, you could. Why don't, as you check if there's any super chats or good questions in the chat.
Cool.
I guess the thing that I would say is I think part of the problem with all of these social media sites and sites like YouTube is partially just about human interaction on these moderation decisions. So honestly, when I finally got a reply from YouTube saying, oh, it's because you didn't have a countervailing view on Trump's speech, I was trying to reply saying, well, what would that look like? Can I put a disclaimer inside the video itself? Should I have an intro that says something like, what would protect my content in the future? And I would sincerely hear them out and try to hear what would enable my content to stay up. And instead, they just demonetized my entire channel the next day. I think that it would really benefit all of the users, basically everybody except perhaps the profit margin at Google, if they would have more human beings to actually talk to the users and explain their expectations rather than just punishing when something goes wrong. There are ways other than like punishing sites, taking away their money, demonetizing videos, giving strikes and so forth. There's other ways to guide people in terms of the content. If there's a disclaimer that you feel would be helpful, YouTube, right? Tell me what that would look like. Don't just penalize me for not having it.
Yeah, but they're not just, they're penalizing people because they're assuming that they endorse every goddamn thing that they're recording. Now, is that not okay? I'm speaking in hyperbole, but in the case of your video, they're assuming that you're endorsing Trump's speech, right?
I don't know how anybody could come to the conclusion that I actually endorsed Trump's speech, but I guess they're saying that my
Well, what's the
video
point of
at least
having a
propagates the-
countervailing view? Sorry to cut you off.
I guess they're saying that because it only presented, it's a video that shows Trump and his supporters, and I don't throw to like some liberal counter activist or something like that therefore it's propagated his views without a counter opinion. I don't know that technically they've accused me of being pro-Trump, but that's basically what they're, I mean, it's basically what
which is totally political censorship. That's just blatant political censorship.
Right. It's absurd, and it's complete, and it totally mischaracterizes the nature of my work.
Yeah. It's wrong on so many levels. It's wrong, period, for any kind of political censorship. But you're not even advocating any of that. You're just literally documenting a public rally, not violent at the time. Oh,
right.
All right. Let's see. Questions we got. Matt, you've been making videos, good videos. Movement for People Party. Stop censoring and canceling day jail. Hey, are there any other? So you are just one of many that just got demonetized.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Graham Elwood. Who are some other ones?
Yeah, so let me pull up. I do have a list somewhere. I have to scroll back a little bit. I've been.
So yeah, this is important. This is important to know that this is not just an issue with Ford. This is a lot of people are
right. So there is a story that I would recommend people read, which if you look up the kind of independent progressive commentator journalist Caitlin Johnstone, she wrote a story kind of that consolidates all of the various accounts that seem to have been purged yesterday. This isn't necessarily a exhaustive list, but Graham Elwood, as you said, there's a channel called the Progressive Soapbox. And then there was Convo Couch. And the thing I would say about Convo Couch that's actually kind of interesting is, like you, I mean, they do, interviews and so forth, and they're more from a progressive angle, but they had me on a week ago. And I'm not saying that those things are related, but I think it's interesting that out of all of the YouTube channels in the world, Convo Couch was demonetized on the same day that I was, and I was on their channel as a guest 1 week ago.
That is sketchy, and
that is
sure
you're looking at this sketchy right now, like, oh shit, my channel's like,
oh god, am I?
You have 1 week. This is like, you ever seen The Ring, the movie The Ring? Like, you watch The Ring and then you have 1 week to live and you know it's happening. Like, you just invited me on and I just told you, when people have me on, they get demonetized, right? Like,
oh god, I hope your Harvard friend
has something good to say about you too. Well, so far I forwarded that, by the way, to YouTube. I mean, we'll see, but I mean, presumably they've read that letter, but as of this exact moment, I can tell you my channel is still demonetized. So we'll see.
And I gotta say, Convo Couch, I'm certain that they've interacted and collaborated with Graham Elwood before, and I'm sure their paths have crossed.
And this is something I've kind of just seen about censorship in general, like on Facebook and YouTube, is that it tends to sort of have like nets. Like in 2018, there was a purge, and a lot of my friends, I actually was not taken down from Facebook when this happened, but in 2018, in October, there was a purge that like a lot of channels went down, and YouTube said, oh, Facebook took down 800 accounts in one swoop. And a lot of them were friends of mine. A lot of the pages were people who had pages pertaining to independent news, anti-war stuff, and anti-drug war stuff, and also police accountability things, sites like Cop Block, which, like the thing that I just did where I was arguing with the police about the right to film a building, like that's what their whole page is. They only do that stuff. Those pages were all taken down at once, and a lot of the people who were taken down knew each other. And so I don't know exactly the way that they like pick these things, but it seems like with both YouTube and Facebook, there's a pattern where the censorship is done sort of like a spider web, right? They start somewhere and then they kind of get the people who are connected. And so I thought it was really fascinating that 1 week after speaking on Convo Couch, that their channel and mine were demonetized essentially simultaneously.
That is pretty amazing and scary.
Yeah.
For being so harmful. It's so harmful that you're just recording raw video out in public for it. But so I'm actually going to speaking with Status Quo videographer in like 10 minutes Andrew Kimmel. You know his story, right?
So I know Andrew Kimmel quite well. I've traveled with him before, and I've also traveled with John Farina from Status Quo. Did Andrew Kimmel shoot for Status Quo on
I
Jan
think
6?
so. I think so.
Oh,
Yeah.
I actually don't think I knew that.
Or you know what? Maybe I might have my stories might be mixing up my stories.
Swapped.
But Andrew, he, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was filming at a rally, it was a gun rights rally, and his live stream got pulled and deleted.
Yeah, that happened to John Farina on a couple weeks ago at a rally that I was also at. I can preempt that conversation if you'd like by just sharing.
Sure, yeah.
So YouTube has this policy that at least it's written as a policy in a way that basically, like, even if I think it's a bad policy, like, at least it's written in a fairly clear policy that says that live streams that show people carrying firearms, handling, or transporting firearms, I think is the way it describes it, are not allowed. And so on July 4th, I filmed an armed demonstration, and YouTube took it down, citing that policy. And I was not aware of it until that situation happened. But January 17th, there were supposed to be armed rallies in basically at every state capital, although they only materialized at about 6 of them. I went to Columbus, Ohio, and filmed there. And I figured, since this is a really big news story, let me just try to live stream this and see what happens. And indeed, it took about 45 minutes, but YouTube took it down. That it was a live stream that contained firearms. And so that was taken down. The next day was the rally in Richmond, which was an armed rally that was very fascinating to me because it brought together armed Black Lives Matter, armed Black Panthers, Boogaloos, a couple of Proud Boys. Like, it really was just kind of a mess of every type of political orientation that you could imagine. And for the most part, they didn't fight against each other. They were actually just kind of like, yeah, we all like guns. That's cool.
Yeah,
right?
It seemed like.
So I didn't attempt to live stream that to YouTube. I only live streamed it to Facebook and Twitter because I didn't want to risk, if I had it like happen like twice in 2 days, like YouTube, that could be like a bigger problem. But John Farina was live streaming for Status Quo, and my understanding is that his was taken down for the same reason that mine was taken down the previous day.
Now you got the notification, so I'm curious, Ford. When I hear that videos are getting blacked out for just having guns in the frame, right? Just having guns and being carried. That's it. Not just simply carried. That freaks me out because any setting at all with police officers or the military has guns. So does this not set the stage? I mean, you let me know if there's some fine print, because it would be nice to know if there's.
So I see one of your commenters noticed that, like, this means you can't film cops at all. In practice, it has only, out of the times that it's been enforced against me, both times have been actual armed rallies, like demonstrations where civilians are carrying large firearms. But it does point out the hypocrisy, though, because obviously live streaming cops involves live streaming people who are carrying firearms, technically. And so YouTube seems to understand that there are exceptions. And at the same time, they certainly are not applying those exceptions to, just normal users. And the other thing is, sort of like we're talking about with the rest of all of these issues, there have been armed demonstrations that CNN and Fox and so forth have broadcast. And I am sure that they have it. I don't have like a specific example in front of me, but the idea that that CNN has never done a live broadcast that went to YouTube with armed demonstrators in it. Like, there's no way that's never happened. And there's no way that YouTube has actually penalized CNN for it. This just never happened.
That is so disturbing that, according to these new rules, they theoretically, they could take down a video because you've got police officers in it with guns, or military, National Guard with guns. They could take it down, and it's totally by the rules, totally by the rule book. That's absurd. Right. And for no other reason than you just had cops in the frame with guns. That's absurd.
I see that you have a commenter who just gave you $5 and asked, "Has Ford interviewed any Boogaloo Boys? What do you think of them?" I've spent a lot of time covering them and interviewing them, and in fact, I don't want to get into this on this live stream, but like one of them was like arrested very early this morning and then got out. And I sort of tweeted a thread where he, I was able to speak to him on the phone for a while, and then I tweeted a thread basically describing what he says happened. I'm not going to go into the details of that here and now, but I have spent a lot of time covering that movement, and I think it's important to film these things, again, in an objective way, right? It's certainly not endorsing any movement to film what they are doing, but I think that they're among the groups that the media has a really hard time understanding. I think they spend a lot of time trying to tie the boogs to Donald Trump, and I think that that's kind of a mistake. On the one hand, because they literally dislike Donald Trump, but more so because I think that that claim, like tying it to Trump, is going to imply that the end of the Trump era means the end of the Boogaloos, and that is just simply not true.
Yeah. They're also trying to tie, I think what I see more of is the media trying to tie them to white supremacy.
Yeah, and so I think that that's a more complicated problem. Because I predominantly cover street activism and not online stuff, like I don't spend my time just reporting on what I see on the internet. There is a little bit of a gap, I might say, between like academic researchers on these studying these movements online, and then the way that what people say to me on the street who come out. And I think it makes sense that there would be a difference in the way that people who exist online are versus the people who come out, to the street. The people on the street have largely been frustrated with that label because typically they actually try to form alliances with Black Lives Matter and so forth. That's been an element of almost every Boogaloo event that I've been at, that they try to emphasize, we support the Black Lives Matter cause, we're trying to be with them, that they support LGBTQ causes, all of that kind of stuff. But they're held back, I guess. Their reputation has been damaged by the association of the term Boogaloo, by like the fact that the very first Boogaloo memes were largely on 4chan, which was using them to imply like racial Civil War things. And so there's this strange disconnect where the people on the street are frustrated by the way that the first users of that term used it because it's been tied to them. So much so that actually on January 17th, when I filmed a Boogaloo person kind of arguing with an ostensible local leftist, the leftist was basically saying, I agree with the things that you're telling me that you believe, but if you actually believe those things, why do you still use that label? Because I'm going to assume that you're, basically a white supremacist if you use that label, was what she was saying to him. And some of the boogs there were like, oh, well, we don't really like that term anymore. I've just been calling myself a libertarian now. I don't actually like the label anymore, just because of that exact reason. So I think it's interesting. I think it kind of goes with overall in the last several years, there have been a lot of conflicts in the United States that have had to do with symbols and names. I would say the Confederate flag would probably be like the #1 example of this, where people literally, I have filmed people fight on the street physically over what they think that symbol means. Right. And so I think that this would probably be another iteration of that same problem where people debate the meaning of American symbolism.
It's like a MAGA hat, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a common thing. Like everybody's heard somebody say that, oh, a MAGA hat is and then they compare it to like a Klan robe or something like that. But of course, the people wearing the hat on their head, for the most part, don't think that that's what that means. And so you have this disconnect between how they're viewed and how they view themselves.
As far as so I was aware that the early memes, that Boogaloo memes that the Boogaloo boys get their name from, I knew they referred to civil wars, but you're telling me it was racial civil war?
Well, so this is the problem. It's inherently decentralized. I think that it's almost like comparing it to like the anonymous movement of like 2014, 2015 or so. In the sense that it's so decentralized, it's generally just really anti-establishment. Some of the Boogaloos will say that they're hoping for a civil war. Some of them will say, we don't want civil war, we're trying to prevent it. And that they just go by that name because they, think that it's inevitable, but they think that it would be a bad thing, right? I mean, the actual differences of ideology that you would find is really, really sort of like profound. So it would be really interesting to see what was the like if you could pinpoint the exact first moment that the term was used politically, like in the modern way that people are thinking about it.
Unfortunately, all that's been deleted probably by Facebook.
Well, I guess that would have been
or
4chan, really.
Maybe not. Yeah.
But Facebook did basically announce, like, this was a while ago, but like a purge of Boogaloo content, and for the most part, they were successful with that. I haven't seen any Boogaloo pages, but even in 2018. I'm sorry, in 2019, I remember seeing like there was a page called Balu the Bear's Trans Inclusive Boogaloo, and it was literally like it was a page committed to the idea that the Boogaloo should include transgender people. Like it was a trans rights civil war page. Like it's like very like, so I mean the level of like bizarre like political hybridization that goes into it is fascinating, but it's part of why I think it's really interesting to go out there and interview them to see what kinds of alliances and things will form out of that.
And to just document what's really going on so that people can see and hear for themselves instead of just reading, you know, taking it off of headlines. I do want to share. So I did a little research into the Boogaloos because there was a big stink about it when Jimmy Dore interviewed one of them.
Yes.
People, you know, accused him of platforming a Nazi essentially. And what I found is, according to the Anti-Defamation League, which is a extremely pro-Israel, it's pro-Israel group that's been fighting anti-Semitism for about 100 years, and they have a reputation of calling everything, you know, going out of the of leaning towards calling something anti-Semitic. Okay, that's their bias, and they determined that most Boogaloo boys were not white supremacists. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I've pretty strong evidence that it's true that most are not white supremacists. Same thing. I heard the same thing from a George Washington University professor who got a lot of those.
You're referring to JJ McNabb?
That's woman.
She's on. She testified in front of Congress. She actually presented a photo of mine of the Boogaloos to Congress.
Okay. Okay.
So I know exactly who you're talking about. GW Center on Extremism, and so yeah, she described to Congress basically that in her view the Boogaloos are a threat to law enforcement. Like she was describing them as a sort of true threat. She was on the counterterrorism committee. That's who she was testifying to. So to be clear, it's not like she was stating that she doesn't view them as a threat. It was just that she was describing that they don't see themselves as racist, and they indeed try to ally with anti-racist causes on some occasions. Yeah. What's been fascinating about that is, like, the photo that she showed was from my July 4th, video and photos that I took, which was at a joint rally between a Black Lives Matter chapter and Boogaloo Boys. And they were doing a joint rally over the subject of their shared disdain for gun control and their shared disdain for basically police brutality and what they called government overreach as a whole. What was really interesting about that day, right? My live stream got taken down by YouTube, of course, because it has guns in it. But there was a local CBS crew that was there. And although the Black Lives Matter participants and the Boogaloo participants were on the same side, and the Black Lives Matter people were armed, one even had a katana. That was pretty interesting. It was the first time I'd seen someone do sword open carry at an event like this. And
hopefully YouTube doesn't take that down, because then we're losing. Then we lose the Karate Kid and all those martial arts movies. That'd be a shame. But anyway,
no, they couldn't lose Karate Kid. They've got YouTube. You have to pay premium to watch Cobra Kai on YouTube.
Okay.
Like, but what was really interesting, a local CBS also covered the same event I did, and their news story about it was 2 minutes. And they just called it a gun rights protest. They did 2 super quick interviews. They showed a speech, and then they actually ended it. This was so bizarre and so disappointing, but I'm also glad it happened because it's the story that I can tell all the time as to like how I think of the mainstream media and their problem. This was a joint BLM Boogaloo rally, and at the end of it, they had only interviewed Boogaloo people. They showed all the Boogaloo people's guns. At the end of it, they showed one very quick clip of a Black Lives Matter person, basically the only BLM person who wasn't armed. They showed him speaking, and you could actually see that people in the crowd were holding up their fist in support, including the Boogaloos, and they, instead of showing what that person was saying, they had it completely, that spot muted, and they had it just a voiceover, and they said, as you can see, some counter demonstrators showed up, but it didn't really amount to much. Like, they were implying like, they called Black Lives Matter counter protesters, ignored the fact that the BLM people were also carrying guns. And even though literally in the shot that they are describing them as a counter protester, the like Boogaloo people are raising their fists in solidarity, and they're like, a counter protester showed up, but it didn't amount to anything. And what they meant by that is it didn't turn violent.
Yeah. No, like, and it is, you were there, right?
Yeah, yeah. No,
so can you say, I mean, is it fair to say that the Black Lives Matter groups and were not counter protesting the Boogaloos?
No, they certainly weren't. And what was additionally a really interesting thing that this news story didn't even touch was there was indeed basically a group with white nationalist sympathies that showed up called the Propertarians. I don't want to like delve into their ideology, but put in a single sentence, they believe that all rights are like derived from property, and they basically claim that white nationalism is acceptable as long as it's like property owning people who enforce it or something. It's whatever. I mean, it's a very outside the mainstream political ideology, but they showed up apparently in support of gun rights. And after they started speaking, the leader of this event, Mike Dunn, of the Boogaloos, basically like marched away. They were like, we're not participating in your guys' speech. They formed up for a little bit with the Black Lives Matter people. They made a plan, and then they marched back at those guys and started chanting, white supremacy sucks, white supremacy sucks, like all together. So it's kind of interesting to see the Boogaloos and the BLMs actually counter protest essentially ostensible, you know, white nationalist leaning people.
They were so not only was this group not the Black Lives Matter was not counter protesting.
The two of them counter protested someone
together.
else together. Yeah. and this local CBS just made it look like it was just Boogaloos, and then there was this other BLM people, but who cares what they have to say? That was what CBS was at.
Amazing. Well, Ford, thanks. That's a great story, and keep documenting, keep going on the ground and documenting this stuff so we can get the real unedited raw story, and tell everybody where they can go to see your work and how they can support you.
Sure. So I will definitely drop the Patreon link straight into your
go for it.
Straight into your chat. And I honestly, like, I hate fundraising. I hate saying, look at my Patreon, send me money.
So that's why I'm doing it for you. Just
so it's like my least favorite thing to do. But honestly, like the last time I got demonetized, it took 7 months to fix it, and I didn't get an apology, right? And I certainly didn't get back paid. So fundraising is probably a little more important for me, even though I don't like it. So the link is patreon.com/Ford Fischer. I dropped it into your live chat. If you want to follow me, I'm at Ford Fischer, which is spelled, I guess, under my name on here. But you can also find, so the outlet is called News to Share. So on Twitter, at Ford Fischer is the main place to find my stuff. But on Facebook and YouTube, the channel is News to Share. That's news, the number 2, share.
Ford, thanks again for joining me. I will, for everyone else listening, I'll be back. Well, I'll let you go, Ford, and then I'll do my little outro. Thanks again. Thanks for joining me.
You bet. Thank you.
Peace. All right, everybody else, thanks for watching. You can help me on Patreon as well. Check out my YouTube videos, and I will be back soon with another person who has been censored by YouTube. Shortly, probably within half an hour. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll be back.